All right, welcome everybody. We are here for the ASA Chicago Chapter 33 educational webinar, Hanging Your Shingle, How to Earn a Living and Manage Your Appraisal Business. We've got an incredible session lined up with Jason Zilberbrand from ASA, president of ASA Chicago Chapter 33, and one of the most recognized names in aircraft and machinery valuation. Jason, how's it going?
Hey, Chris. Thank you for having me, and welcome to everybody for joining us. This topic couldn't be more timely. You know, the appraisal industry is going through a massive generational shift. On one side, we're seeing a wave of younger appraisers entering the field. They're hungry, they're tech savvy, they're looking for some independence. And on the other hand, we have a bunch of seasoned corporate appraisers that are leaving larger firms to start their own businesses. So I think that combination has created a real moment of opportunity, but also some risk, because starting your own practice isn't about doing good appraisal work. It's about learning how to run a business. And that would include things like how to find clients, how to build your credibility, how to price your services. I think that's something that I get asked all the time is, what should I be charging? And then how do you manage your reputation in an environment that's changing faster than ever?
And that's so true. It's not something that any of us are ever taught, right? You have something that you just typically have to learn on the job.
Exactly. Yeah. I think most of us learn that the hard way. And today we're going to cover what works right now. And I think this is pretty timely for a lot of people, right? So we're going to talk about Google. We're going to talk about SEO. We're going to talk about how to use AI intelligently and how to build a niche market of appraisal work. And I think that that's something that's going to really separate you from your competitors, right? You have to build a niche. And we're going to talk a lot about that. And then we're going to talk about how to establish yourself as an expert witness. And, we're going to be candid. We're going to be practical. I may be a little blunt at times because, the truth is most new appraisal businesses, they fail not for the lack of skill, but because they don't know how to sell, market, or differentiate themselves. And, sometimes it's really simple, like just answering your phone.
Right. And I think you mentioned before that appraisers really misunderstand what it is they're selling. So what do you mean by that?
Well, I think most think they're selling appraisal reports and they're not, right? So what you are selling is trust and credibility. And you're an expert, and I think you have to act like one, right? So people hire you for who you are and what you know, not the paper report you hand them.
When someone's hiring an appraiser, what kind of things are they going to be thinking about when they look for, like, how do I know who to trust?
Well, I think for one, you have to know your topic, right? Your work scope. You have to know your subject. And I think that that's something that's easily said and it's not so easy to practice. And so a really easy way to blow your credibility, right, is to not know the asset that you're being hired to appraise, or, you're faking it and you're Googling everything. And unfortunately you put together a final report and it's anything but accurate. So, I think selling trust, selling credibility, selling expertise, these are all like really big catchphrases. But at the end of the day, it comes down to being honest. And I think sometimes it's knowing when you don't know, maybe it's time for you to refer somebody else. And I think that that really can go a long way. And I tell people all the time, that's not my expertise, but let me refer you to someone who does that. And I think that that leads to credibility, right? And I think there's a lot of things you can do to build rapport. It just takes time. And nobody wants to hear this, but this is like becoming a decent golfer, right? You got to hit the same shot, 10,000 times before you get somewhat decent at it. And so, appraising and building relationships, it takes time, right? Nobody's going to call you and say, well, in my case, here's 100 aircraft fleet to go appraise. They might test you. It might take years for them to hire you to do one. And your job is to impress them, right? But you got to stay in the trenches. You got to know your market, right? Continuing education is a big part of it, not falling asleep at the wheel, staying on top of what's hot in your known industry, right? These are all things that you can do to reach out to your potential clients, remind them of why you're an expert. Maybe it's writing articles, maybe it's writing white papers. And we're going to talk a lot about that, what you can do to help build your business. So, I think a really good segue, because our next topic is Google and SEO. And I've been writing since I've been a little kid. I mean, I went to a private school, and a lot of what I grew up doing was writing and performing arts. And so I'm very comfortable, speaking in front of a camera and writing and putting my thoughts on paper. And I think that those are skills that you're not going to get good at overnight, but if you really practice them, and you start small and you build, I think you're going to get very comfortable. And that's what helps build expertise, right? When people Google your subject matter and they see that you've been writing reports and articles and participating in things like webinars, right? That all leads to credibility.
Yeah, and that's such a critical thing, right? Having this online presence, Google, SEO. I actually wanted to talk initially about maybe one of the easiest things we could start with is the Google business profile, right?
Right.
Is that something that every appraiser should do?
Well, I mean, I think if you are smart, you want your business generating revenue. I tell this people, the ultimate business is the one that generates revenue while you're sleeping. Google can let that happen, right? Google has a storefront that's never closed. If you build, and it all starts at the very basic, right? You have to build a good website. You should have somebody, and you don't have to hire them. They could be, independent contractor. They could work for you a couple hours a month. I can refer you to some SEO people, but you got to get an SEO expert because the game is changing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Google used to be the only game in town. Well, at least the last 20 years, right? Since the internet took over. That's changed. My business, for example, does very little Google referrals anymore. Believe it or not, like 75-80% of our referrals that aren't coming direct, they're not coming from Google. They're coming from ChatGPT. They're coming from AI sources. And I think that this is really important for everybody to understand. So ChatGPT isn't anything different than Google. It's just got a fancy user interface. It allows you to interact with it differently, right? So all ChatGPT is doing is going out and doing the same thing Google did. And so if you do the correct SEO, which is keywording, right? It stands for search engine optimization. Google's a search engine. ChatGPT is a search engine. They just have a different storefront, so to speak, right? So the first thing you got to do is you got to have a great website. Doesn't have to be huge. Doesn't have to be 25 pages. Actually, I think in the appraisal business, less is more, because we all have a very confusing and way over the head profession, not too dissimilar to accounting and legal work. And I think our clients, we think things are important to them, but it goes over their head, right? And you get deep in the weeds real quick and you lose them. So I think a really lean storefront online is your best bet. So yeah, something easy, Google business profile, get a really nice website put together, be able to do business on that website, right? You got to be able to sell. If your website is just an information piece, like a brochure, you are blowing massive low-hanging fruit opportunities, because whether you're an art appraiser or machinery appraiser, somebody is going to be looking for your expertise and they want to buy right then and there. And if you give them the freedom to go look at someone else that does have the ability to sell online, you're going to lose them. And so, yeah, you got to make an investment up front. You got to build your storefront. You got to make it easy for people to find you. And that's through SEO. That's through Google, which then ChatGPT will pick up on. But again, guys, this doesn't take, 5 minutes. This takes sometimes years. I mean, we tweak our website at VREF every week. We have multiple templates, for lack of a better word, landing pages, right? So when you go to our website, we have landing pages that we use for testing to see how people interact with them. We take that data and then we manipulate what we're doing to make it better, less confusing, easier, streamlined, right? We want to keep you at our website. That's your goal. You got to be the expert, right? So how do you do that? Articles, podcasts, YouTube. You don't have to make 25-minute or 1 hour videos. You can do, 30-second TikToks if that's more your style, but you got to practice. And I think that's the scariest thing if you've never been in front of a camera. It's horrible. It's like when you first hear your recorded voice, it's absolutely frightening what you sound like to yourself. You got to just keep doing it. And trust me, one day you're going to hear yourself and you're going to analyze your voice. You're not going to hear. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it gets really like it's, and you, Chris, you've done a bunch of recordings. You know what I'm saying. At some point, your recorded voice doesn't bother you anymore, and you can start to deal with it from a more analytic standpoint, right? So all of these things, you're running your own business. You're a jack of all trades, but you got to remember you're a master of none. So you have to go to experts that can get you to where you need to be, and it's going to take time.
And you made a great point about creating the content that answers the questions that your clients are asking.
Right.
They want to know how to value machinery after a bankruptcy. Oh, these people know what they're talking about. So yeah, you can make that YouTube video, the TikTok, the article. And that's a great thing with the ChatGPT stuff too, is that wherever you put this information about yourself, it will find it. So the more, the better. And you mentioned a lot about niche markets. Why is that so important, especially these days?
Well, I mean, I think that the biggest problem you have is competitors. And this is going to be an odd discussion because, we're all appraisers. But if we were all sitting in a room together, I would say, look to your right and look to your left, right? Those are the people that you're up against, assuming that you're all in the same practice. You are appraising cars, art, jewelry, aircraft in my case, right? Machinery. I know that there's people that sit on my board that do satellite dishes, right? The more narrow your focus, the stronger your brand is, the stronger you are as an appraiser. Sometimes it gets to the point where you are fearful that there's not enough business out there, right? And I think that that's why people are so afraid to develop a niche. But I got to be honest with you, you get to a point, as the years click on, that niche feeds itself. It's like a starter for sourdough, right? I mean, if you feed it and you do what you're supposed to in terms of writing articles and working on your niche from a marketing standpoint, your clients are just going to keep coming back. They're going to keep referring more and more. And you're going to get to a point where you have, a pretty full docket in terms of business. And that's a great thing. I think when you try and cover everything or you go after everything, and that's kind of the younger person's mentality, you're afraid to say no because you're hungry. And I get it. But I think you need to focus on, where you want to be in 10 years as an appraiser, where you want to be in 20 years as an appraiser. And if you're going to be out on your own, you might not have the ability to sell your business to somebody else, right? So these are all really big critical issues for longevity. I think a niche market is what allows you to stay relevant for a much longer period of time. And I can't talk about jewelry because I'm obviously not a jewelry appraiser, but I can talk about aircraft appraising and I can talk about some other assets because I'm very familiar with them, like, vintage guitars and cars. And if you're passionate about it and you love it, that's the first step, because continually educating yourself, take cars, for example. There's always a new car coming out. There's always something you can learn. And for me, that's the beauty of aviation. It is so complicated. There are so many aircraft models. There's aircraft that were built in the 40s that I appraise. And there's segments within aviation that unfortunately get ignored often. I'll give you a couple of examples. If I was starting out as an aircraft or an aviation appraiser, the last thing I would want to do is try and appraise business jets, because it's going to take you 10 to 15 years to know anything. No one's going to hire you if you're just starting to appraise a $20 million aircraft. Likewise, the little airplanes, believe it or not, are much more difficult to appraise than the bigger ones because there's a lot more moving pieces, so to speak. And each one of those moving pieces, the sum of the total is such a small number that if you're off by a few dollars, the buyer or the seller notices it immediately. So accuracy is like critical at the smaller end of the market. So I don't know that I would want to start there either. I mean, you could go to a flight school and say, I'd like to appraise your aircraft for free, and they probably will let you, but that's not going to generate any revenue. So you got to look to places that are ignored, right? FBOs, ground equipment, hangars. I don't know anybody that specializes in appraising hangars. I don't know why. People call me all the time. I can't refer the business out because I don't know anybody that does it. So if you're a aspiring aviation appraiser, I just gave you a free one. Go learn, your local market and start appraising hangars. You'll be shocked how much business there is, right? So that's the niche. Not everybody is going to be appraising business jets. Not everybody's going to be doing damage assessment. I got to tell you, I fell into it, right? I didn't just start appraising aircraft and doing damage assessment. It happened because I owned it. I owned my own airplane that got destroyed. And I mean, I've talked about this on my podcast. That is what led me down this path. And that was, I don't know, 25 years ago. So being impacted directly and knowing, and I don't, this isn't about patting myself on the back and thinking I'm a genius, but I don't think I'm stupid. And this stuff was going way over my head. I could not figure out what diminution of value is. I didn't understand, what the hell was going on with the assessment side of damage history. So I decided right then and there, if it's frustrating me as an aircraft owner, it's frustrating a lot of other people. And that's when I decided to make it my expertise. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but that's how you build an expert witness business, by having that niche, by knowing that niche better than any of your competitors. They're going to go to you whenever they get a call that leads to litigation. Because let's be honest, nobody wants to go through a deposition as an expert or as a party. It's horrible. It's very stressful, to say the least. And when you're an expert, it's a very serious scope of work. It's not like appraising at all. But with that comes a lot of revenue, right? Expert witness work is very lucrative. And typically, the dirtier the job, right, the more lucrative it is. So if you are willing to put yourself on a witness stand and get beat up by opposing counsel and be thrown under the bus during depositions, yeah, you're going to make a lot of money. And for me, it doesn't impact me. I let it go right off my back. I know it's not personal. They don't know me. So I don't let it bother me. But a lot of people I know can't handle it. And so that, again, that opens up a whole world out there of business, because all you got to do is put the shingle out there, right? That's what this whole webinar was about. If you want people to hire you as an expert witness, you got to tell people that you are one. Right.
And then getting back to the websites, most appraisers have websites, but very few get business from them. They're just these dead pieces of real estate. Why is that?
Typically. Well, I mean, I think a lot of websites are built and then ignored. You build it. It's like running a marathon. It's like, you never look at it again. Most people I know have websites and have never visited them after they were built. They don't even know if there's something broken. And a lot of sole proprietors, let's be honest, they got 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, whatever your hours are, but they're in over their head from the second they walk in the office. Most people are not good time management, from a skill set standpoint. So what you need to do is devote, 25% of your day to your business, not to your clients, not to drafting reports, not to going and seeking out new business, but to dealing with, running your business. And part of that is your website. So I think a lot of people, they build websites for their friends and for their peers, but they don't build them for the clients. They don't talk to the clients. At VREF, we send out a survey every couple of weeks. We make phone calls. We ask our clients to talk to us, to tell us what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. We take those interviews and it provides us keywords. It provides us frequently asked questions. That's what assists us in building our website. That's what assists us in knowing what our clients want. Because at the end of the day, what you need to do is you got to be competent, right? You got to be a professional. And all of these things lead to you looking trustworthy. So I don't know. I mean, we can go over what a good website should include. I think that that's important for people.
If I'm starting from scratch, I just like, hey, I'm ready to build my website. What should I keep in mind with this?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that this is a very interesting topic, and it's one that actually we talk about at my company every single week. And it's important because this is your shingle. This is how you market to people every day. You want a clear message. You know, you want people to see what you look like. I know people will tell you, don't put a photo up, don't do this. I disagree. I think it leads to credibility. It drives me crazy when I go on LinkedIn and there's no photo. It's like, I don't know. It doesn't make me feel like that person is trustworthy because I don't know what they look like. Testimonials. That's such an easy one. And I wish people would do this more often. Every time you talk to a customer who says something positive, ask them to put it in writing and then put it on your website. I'm not talking about 5-star reviews, the truth. You know, what did you do right? Because if they're willing to say what you did right, that's a huge deal. And I think other people will read it. And then I think the big one that people just completely blow, especially today, especially sole proprietors, is there's no call to action anywhere on their website. It's a website. It looks like a brochure. They could be selling a dishwasher for all we know, but they're selling consulting services and there's no call to action. There's no way for me to interact with them. There's no way for me to sign up to a newsletter. We have these same issues, believe it or not, at our chapter website because it's been years since anybody updated it. So that's part of what we're doing is updating our website, having strong call to actions, making sure people know where to go to get information, news, articles, white papers. You know, I will tell you right now that the people that refer business to you are not your peers necessarily. They're lawyers, they're accountants. In my case, they're finance companies, they're banks, they're lenders, and they need appraisals every day. So you want your website to work for you.
Right. And that's the biggest mistake, right? People create their websites for other appraisers, but the
Right.
other appraisers they're not giving you business.
Well, I mean, real quick, Chris, I mean, I would never do this without permission, but I mean, if we just Googled appraisers and pulled up their websites, I'm willing to wager every single one of them is going to be littered with use pap language and complicated big words. Here's something you guys can all do immediately. There's a software program called Hemingway, and believe it or not, it's free. If you use it a lot, they charge you, but it's very inexpensive. And what Hemingway does is it takes your content and it rewrites it in at a grade level that the average person can read. And I think appraisers are brilliant people, but they speak in a legalese language that consumers can't stand. I mean, nobody cares, guys, about all the use pap stuff. What they care about is how do they reach you, and how do they order an appraisal. So the first thing you could do is take your existing website content, copy it, paste it in a Hemingway. If it comes back at the 12th grade or higher reading level, you have blown it. It should be no greater than 8 or 9, right? Believe it or not, 8th grade, that's about the max for most people in terms of being able to comprehend these big, long, lengthy, content rich articles or websites.
It's very
And
true.
that,
I
right?
have a friend who's one of the top copywriters in the world, and he puts his stuff into Hemingway to make sure it's at third grade level. Like he
Yeah.
does it.
I
It's
mean,
like if it's higher than third grade, he's like, it's not gonna work.
it not only does it not work, but it's amazing to me how many websites are just, it's like you're trying to impress somebody, but you're not impressing the client. You're impressing your buddy who's your peer. I mean, it's totally obvious, but it's such an emotional thing. You can't, I don't know. It's perspective, right? The closer you are to something, the harder it is sometimes to see it. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it's taking that step away from yourself and thinking, okay, if I were to buy this, what would I want to see? Do I want to see a cluttered website with a million things on it and walls of text? Like, no, can you solve my problem? Can you?
yeah. And not only can you solve my problem, but can I actually contact you?
Right.
Right. I mean, how many websites don't have a phone number, no address, no email? There's no contact form, and there's just jargon up the yin yang. I mean, it's just so, You got to be careful. I mean, I think that that's one of the things all of these appraisal industries have in common is that they're jargon rich, right? So aviation is all acronyms. And, there's all sorts of stuff that you see from one industry to the next, and it goes right over people's head. You got to remember that a lot of the business you're going to be doing is for people that have no idea, what that art is because they inherited it or their dad died and left it to them, right? There's a huge section of business that comes my way from death and divorce and estate, right? So these are people that these aren't their passions, these aren't their hobbies. They're inheriting these assets and they don't know what to do. I know that's one of the things that I think we're going to get into is referrals. But, why don't we talk a little bit about AI before we go there? Because I know everybody's kind of scared about this, the new hot catchphrase of
AI is everywhere.
2025. Yeah, it is.
Should appraisers be concerned by this? Is AI replacing appraisers, or is this going to be more of an opportunity than anything else?
Well, I mean, I think that look, I don't believe AI is going to replace appraisers. What I do think is going to happen is that, and we talked about this right at the beginning, right? So, and I can share with you my own use because I think that that's going to help you guys see. So prior to 2023, whenever I looked anything up on the internet, I would go to Google. I would have a Google search window up on my desktop. Anything I looked up would go right into Google. We started playing with AI right about the beginning of 2023. And, and there's several. There's, Facebook or Meta's version, and there's ChatGPT, and there's Sora, but they all basically do the same thing. So what it is it's like an additional layer on top of Google. And I'm sorry if I'm boring you guys. If people know what this stuff is, you can tune out or go get a drink. But for those that don't, what ChatGPT does is it puts like an additional layer on Google. So instead of you typing it into Google, you now have this very human-like interface where you can ask questions and you can interact with the answers. But don't be fooled, it's still Google, right? It's just dressing it up. And so I don't think, look, I don't know one lender, for example, that would say, well, let's put into ChatGPT what this house is worth and let's take that to the bank and credit committee. It would never happen, people, ever. There's just way too much risk. I think what people are going to do is they're going to use it to research you. That's for sure. They're going to use it to know if you know what you're talking about. They might run your report through ChatGPT and see if there's a ton of errors. They might see if it's credible or not. I think that that's probably more likely to happen than AI replacing any one of us. But I mean, let's be honest, AI has replaced a lot of appraising work. For example, in the car community, right? You can go to, I don't know, Kelly's or Carfax, and they're using AI to generate values on stuff. And I think people take that stuff to the bank every day. I know a lot of dealerships that rely heavily on that type of data. But the one thing you got to remember about that sector is that they deal in high volume, right? There's public auctions every day with reported sales. In my industry, there is no MLS, right? We don't have any way of tracking transactions. So I don't think AI can replace an appraiser because the appraiser is kind of like the lifeline to the market for a lot of clients, especially mine. I mean, I know my banking clients, for example, would have no clue what's going on in the market if it wasn't for me. So I don't know. I think AI is going to continue to evolve, right? The next step is probably, unfortunately, good or bad. I don't know. I'm kind of torn, but I do think it's going to become physical. I think you're going to have devices start to come out. They're going to have, Sora or ChatGPT built in. It's going to be the next wave of Alexa type of devices. I think you're going to see a ton of it in the car world, helping people do mundane tasks that'll become automated. But I don't think it's going to be at the professional level, But who knows? I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, after all, they're doing robot surgeries every day now, right? And a lot of the data I'm reading about these robotic surgeries is that they're a lot more accurate. There's a lot less recovery time. There's no human error involved. So if this is about human error, I think you can use, AI to help you with your job. But I don't think it can replace you actually doing the work. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to use it to review your work. I mean, I think that that's just being smart, just like, we talked about Hemingway. Another great tool is Grammarly. I don't know if you use Grammarly or not, Chris, but I love Grammarly. It's like my favorite thing in the world, And I can't believe how many people probably on this webinar have never heard of it, but it basically fixes all your punctuation. It makes you write in the intended voice. So you can change the voice in Grammarly to professional or friendly, or not necessarily slang, but more like, I don't know, like email type of talk, where that comes in handy, in my opinion, is it kind of takes the stress off of your weaknesses. Because, I mean, let's be honest, we all make grammar mistakes. Nobody wants to put out, a punctuation error, but Grammarly prevents you from doing it. I actually have it downloaded, so it's embedded in all of my apps. So I just click on it in the corner, and it even fixes all of my emails before they go out.
And AI it's a great tool for all of that. And especially as an expert with AI will always be light years ahead of just a random person trying to fumble around with AI. So you, as the expert appraiser, again, your niche, especially the weirder you get. Like, I don't think there's a chat GPT for airplane hangars. I don't think that's
No, you're right. There, you're right. I mean, I guess the business has to be there to begin with, right? And I think, like, let me give you an example of a trap that I think some folks fell into. UAV, drone, EV work, right? And I think there was a period of time there where everybody thought that transition was going to happen relatively quick, but it just didn't, because let's be honest, there's bureaucratic red tape involved. Nothing happens quick, and sometimes profits get put before the environment, right? So I think a lot of those projects have been killed off. So you wouldn't have wanted to put all your eggs in one basket, I guess is what I'm saying. So yeah, you got to be careful. I think, there's two schools of thought here. One is for the older, established appraiser who's no longer interested in working for a big company. And maybe that's because they don't want to go downtown into a big office, or maybe it's because they built their book of business and now they can kind of not necessarily be on cruise control, but in a lot less stressful of an environment, right? Being your own boss is the best. You make your own decisions. You work for the clients you want to work for. Sometimes in corporate America, you can't make those decisions. So I get it, and also I think that there's that grass is always greener. A lot of people, especially I think since like Shark Tank and a lot of this stuff started coming out, but I think everybody like kind of aspires to be an entrepreneur for some reason, right? It's just a big thing, and it can be a trap. I mean, look, let's be honest. Some people are just not cut to be their own boss. You have to have the ability to not only manage time, but to be effective with your time. And I think that that's really critical. Because if you're all over the place all day, nothing's going to get done. And that, I think, for me at least, came with age. I mean, I know I struggled being my own boss when I was in my 30s. I've always worked for myself or for a family business. I never was in like that big corporate environment. And I think with that comes like work ethic, for lack of a better term. But once you start running your own business, you're wearing like 25 hats, right? So I can give you an example of what my work week is like. That might help some people, figure out what they should do. And then I think we can jump into the big topic I think everybody wants to talk about, which is, how to become an expert witness. But, real quick, I mean, Mondays are a nightmare because it's Monday. And so typically the first hour of my work week is just catching up with emails from the weekend. And then, you've got to be in that mindset that you're out there cultivating, but you're also completing, right? So there's that balance all day. But I got to be honest with you, the best part of my day is taking breaks. I mean, you got to just stop for a half hour, even if it's walking around the block. I work out of my house. I walk out of my front door, even if it's miserable outside, and I'll go for a walk. I'll get some air. But I think that that's really important. And every day it's kind of the same thing. There's business stuff I got to deal with. There's client stuff I got to deal with. The one thing that I don't do is I don't let personal stuff infiltrate my business day. I will do that stuff either during lunch or super early in the morning or super late at night. But I'm very focused during the day because there's just too much that I've got to get done. Another part of running your own business is invoicing. Something people don't want to talk about. And I don't know why, but you're going to have to figure out how to send out invoices. QuickBooks, very easy to use. I recommend it. Your accountant will love it. But there's a dark side to sending out invoices. You got to collect your fee. Look, appraisers get stiffed all the time. It's just part of doing business. But one of the things you can do to avoid not getting paid is demand that you're paid before they get the report. That will limit, almost all of your collection issues. But there's going to be deals that you do. There's going to be deals that you do that you're not going to get paid on. So part of your week has to be devoted to collections. The bigger your company gets, the bigger that accounts receivable number is going to be. And it becomes a big time suck. If you find yourself doing multiple reports a day, you're probably in a position where you need to hire somebody to help you. And it doesn't have to be somebody who's an appraiser. It can be someone who's really good at administrative work. But I guess what I'm trying to say is time management is really easy to say, and it's really difficult to do. Some of the best entrepreneurs I know suffer from time management. And the people I'm talking about, you send them an email and you never hear back from them. You got to chase them down. That's horrible. I got news for you. That's why I get business from a lot of my competitors. They don't answer their phone. It's absolutely wild to me, Chris,
It's the basics. And like you mentioned too, energy management as well as time management, right? If you know
Yes.
that your deep work is best in the morning, maybe don't spend that time doing administrative work, right?
Well, totally. I mean, that's so true. I do a lot of like podcasting and stuff, and I find that I'm better off with recording in the afternoon. It's a little quieter, so I do it in the afternoon. I don't try and stress myself out and getting it done in the morning and balancing the phone ringing. I mean, yeah. And I think what you said about taking time for yourself is so important. You cannot burn yourself out. If you're working 5 days a week, 10, 12, 15 hours a day, right at the beginning of starting your own business, you cannot do that, for years without burning out. Trust me.
Yeah, there's a price.
There's a price you pay. The price you're going to pay is going to be the physical, your health. It's going to go to the toilet. You can't do it. I think every successful entrepreneur I know has the same trait. They take care of themselves. They're up early. They work out. They watch what they eat. They know that there's a direct correlation between their output and what they're putting into their body, right? So, you don't have to be a runner. You don't have to, I'm not suggesting you go start lifting weights, but I think even if it's just stretching or doing yoga or, anything early in the morning to kind of get yourself going, I think it's helpful, Let's talk about one thing that I think sneaks up on at least aging professionals I know, and that's what if you get sick and you run your own business?
Oh, yeah.
It's so easy when you're in a company because someone else is going to pick it up. If you don't show up to work because you're sick, it's not the end of the day. If you're running your own business and you're not taking care of yourself and then you're getting sick on top of it, and now you're missing work, I can tell you firsthand, I've seen appraisers unfortunately die from not taking care of themselves. I mean, it happens, it's one of those things. I mean, you don't want to hand someone your book of business because you can't get to work because you don't feel well. And I'm not talking about like, the disease or that kind of a, rare situation, but working yourself to death. It happens. Trust me, it happens.
Love it. And you kind of going back to the human element of this, right? If AI is not going to replace us, the human side of it of referrals, how do we build those relationships? How do we turn one job into a steady stream of jobs?
referrals is such an interesting one. I used to, it's like, this is what kept me up at night trying to figure out how I was going to build a book of business. But I will tell you what I discovered is that if you treat every client like A, they're your only client, and B, that whatever product you provide them, you'd be so proud of it that if it was on the front page of the newspaper, it wouldn't bother you, right? I think that those are two things you can do right off the bat. Every client of mine is of equal weight. And I believe me, I have a lot of famous clients. I don't treat them any different. You know, the guy that calls me that wants his $100 million, 767 appraised gets treated exactly the same as the guy with his $50,000, Cessna 150. I figured that out a long time ago. If you treat everybody with the same level of respect, it comes back to you. Follow up with people. It's amazing how many people have work that they've already completed. They already have a book and they've never gone back to their book. They don't reach out to them by email. They don't stay in touch, right? I think referrals, they build businesses faster than any advertisement ever could. The reason is that as an appraiser in your own industry, you cannot advertise outside of that industry very easily to get new business, right? So all those ads those banner ads, we've all done it, right? We've all taken magazine ads out in our industry trade papers. They do nothing. Trust me, there's a marketing person who's going to call you this afternoon and tell you they got a game plan. It doesn't work. You will spend a ton of money and you will get nothing back. What does work is email campaigns. Every client you do business with, you have their contact information, put it into MailChimp, for example. And then every week, send an email out to your network. Maybe it's pitching new business. Maybe it's bringing up a topic that you think is going to be something that they need to know about, whatever your industry is. But I think that, that's how you can build referrals. Every time we send out an email, we get business back from it. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. What's the point, right? So if you're doing banner ads and you're sitting there going, man, this stuff just doesn't work. Advertising is just stupid. It's not. It's your methodology that's broken. Again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but industry trade magazines are worthless. They usually get thrown right in the garbage. Actually, I probably have a stack of about 25 of them in my trash can right now that I could pull out. And it's no disrespect. It's old news. We don't get our news from the newspaper anymore. When's the last time any of you actually went and bought a physical newspaper? I actually think most of us get our news from Facebook, which is another place you can go. And I want to mention it real quick because I think that it's something that a lot of people overlook. They go to LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is fine if you want to do peer-to-peer work. If you want referrals from other appraisers, go to LinkedIn. If you want business from buyers or sellers, go to Facebook. Go to those closed groups. Every single hobby out there, whether it's art, jewelry, diamonds, Rolexes, exotic cars, Ferraris, I don't care what it is. There's probably, I don't know, last time I checked, there were like 400, maybe 500 aircraft for sale, private groups, not even the public ones, just private ones. There's a Cessna 206, there's a Cessna 150, there's a Cessna 172. Market to them. I mean, you got to get permission. You got to make sure that the administrators will allow you. But talk about low-hanging fruit. You already know that these people are real. You've already got their contact information. You know their picture. You know their name. It's pretty easy, I think, to try and win some of them over. As a matter of fact, I see it every day in aviation. I see a lot of brokers getting involved in Facebook. They'll chime in on somebody's post, and they do it in an artful way. Somebody asks a question looking for help. You answer the question and pitch your services. Sometimes they're going to call you. It's not going to happen every time, but if it happens once a week, that's one more deal you get that you didn't have to pay for. It's that easy.
Yeah, and that small thing can move the needle, right?
Yeah, we're not talking about major moves. Guys, it doesn't work that way. Go watch Wall Street, my favorite movie in the world. There is no quick buck. You're gonna have to put the work in. It takes due diligence every day. practice makes perfect, right? And what you're really doing is you're practicing every day to eventually have a business that works for you while you're sleeping, you know? And I think that that's a perfect segue into the expert witness category, because I know that this is a huge topic for people.
Yeah. And you've done a lot of expert witness work yourself. And like you mentioned, needing that credibility, where would you start? If I'm a new appraiser, or maybe I'm corporate and I'm coming independent, how would I get started as an expert witness?
So I think you got to realize what the work is in your field. And for example, like, you know, art appraisers, there's probably a fair amount of fraud in art, right? So I would assume that there'd be a lot of litigation around that. If you don't have the expertise to know a real painting from a fake one, I don't know anybody's going to hire you as an expert. So I think step one to being an expert witness is kind of, we're now fast tracking, right? This is your future. So if everything we've talked about in this webinar has been present, this is what happens in 5 to 10 years, right? You put in the hard work, you've built your business, you have been practicing every day and improving your skills. At some point, one of your clients is going to get themselves in the hot water. It happens. Maybe it's a divorce. You know, a lot of people get into expert witness work through divorce because it's a lot less intimidating. You know, big litigation, especially federal litigation, is super intimidating. Dealing with big time litigators is super intimidating. I will tell you, the first few cases I did, man, I would do anything to go back and redo. You know, it's hard work. If you think appraising, you know, a satellite dish is difficult, try getting involved to defend that in court with a jury trial. You know, I'm telling you, there's nothing more stressful. But here's the flip side. And we talked about it at the beginning. It's such difficult work and it is so stressful and it takes up so much of your time. You're paid very well for it. You know, you're paid by the hour. There's no flat fee for this stuff. If you get involved in a lawsuit, especially federal litigation, pretty much can guarantee 18 months to 2 years of your life gone, just like that. You will be at their beck and call. You know, forget about vacations. That weekend soccer game with your kid, nah, that's probably not going to happen. And if it does, you're going to be on the phone. I'm being honest with you. These big federal lawsuits are massive. I have put together, God, I mean, I've had cases where I've had to do 4 rebuttal reports on top of my initial expert witness report that was 75 pages. You know, you're reading thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of documents. It's hard work. There's a couple things that I would do. If you want to get into, if you've been appraising for a while and you have credibility, right? And you have a track record, my suggestion would be start training now for litigation. Do the SEAK conferences, SEAK, fantastic. I did them all. You know, they have like a 2 or 3 day conference. They do mock depositions. They go through your public profile. You're on display, people, right? If you've got skeletons in your closet, this is not the work for you. I just want to get that right out in the open. If you have something that you don't want discovered, it's going to get discovered. That's the real dark side of being an expert witness. Because whether you're doing this for a client, right, on the plaintiff side or on the defense side, the opposing counsel's job is to make you look inept. Their only job is to make you look like you have no credibility. It's not personal. It's just what they're there to do. That is their job. Your job is to explain to the juror or the trier of fact, you know, why the value of this asset is X or why it's Y. And how you approach that, that's going to be where, you know, unfortunately, there's a lot of ammunition, right? So if you put together a weak report, a lot of times experts work in a vacuum and they don't realize that there's another expert on the other side doing the same thing. And a lot of people, when they start doing this type of work, do not understand the difference between representing a defense and representing a plaintiff or a defendant, I mean. There's risks to both. As an expert witness, you never want to get the reputation as to only working with, one or the other, right? You don't want to be a defendant only expert witness, and you certainly don't want to be a plaintiff only expert witness. You want a nice mix. So sometimes, unfortunately, you have to pass, on lawsuits. I do it all the time because I don't want it to be too heavy where it's in favor of one or the other. Because again, it's credibility, lawyer style, big firms, small firms, you're going to work with all of them. The smaller the firm, it's like pulling hair. They don't get it. They don't know how to use an expert witness. You're doing more coaching than you are doing more witnessing. The bigger firms will muscle you around. They like to rack up your fees and not pay you. They like to hold things over your head. They like to, what's the worst part about being an expert witness? Friday afternoons, because that's when all the calls come in. Because lawyers are jerks. I'm just going to say it. They love to ruin your weekend. Their job is to ruin your weekend. I don't know why, but especially if it's opposing counsel and it's a really heated lawsuit. Yeah, you're going to get correspondence on a Friday afternoon. It's going to come in at 3:00, or worse yet, they're going to call you at 3:00 and say, I need this by Monday, right? Deadlines mean absolutely nothing to lawyers and this type of work, meaning when they need it, they need it. They don't care what else you have that you're dealing with. So be careful signing up as an expert if you've got a lot of constraints on your schedule. So, it's really complicated. I don't think any two lawsuits I've ever been involved in are the same. What I will say is most of my work does not go to the courtroom. I've had a handful of cases go to court. Most of it settles. Most of what I deal with is from the damage perspective. And so there's usually, a third party claim involved, and there's a lot of jockeying and negotiating. But, luckily, knock on wood, a lot of this stuff does settle out. It doesn't mean you're not going to get deposed, right? It doesn't mean that you're not going to have to write a report. It's all about the style of the law firm that you're working for. Well, what I would say is that if you think that this is for you and you want to add a nice chunk of change to your pocket, and I'm really, you need to know when I first started appraising aircraft full time, the expert witness work is what allowed me to survive. Because it's so lucrative, and I didn't have the book of business where I was doing appraisals every day for aircraft. The expert witness work carried me when times were slow. So if you want to go down that avenue, there's two things you should do. One, sign up for Seek. I don't even know if they do in person anymore. It might only be online, but I really, really think those guys are great. The other organization is FEWA, FEWA. I think it stands for the Forensic Expert Witness Association. I was on their board for a long time. They're fantastic as well. I think the difference is FEWA is more for heavy forensic type of expert witness work, whereas Seek is probably where most of the people that are attending this webinar are gonna go, because it's, you don't have to be a doctor, you don't have to have like crazy degrees. It's just taking your expertise that you do every day and turning that into a report that a lawyer can use to fight a lawsuit. But I think the most important thing to do is you got to ask for the work, right? So you got to build your website out. You got to have the content. People need to know that you're available to do litigation support. How about letting the lawyers know that you're available to do litigation support? You're going to be surprised. As soon as you tell people, that you're ready for that business, go to the registers. There's a bunch of expert witness registers. Juris Pro, Seek has one. You got to pay them, right? There is definitely a financial commitment to this. The C classes will cost you a few $1,000s. Reoccurring education to be an expert witness is probably about the same. You will absolutely need insurance, error and omission insurance, get a liability policy. That's probably another $8,000 to $10,000 a year. But, those registries, and there's a bunch of them. I don't use them anymore, but they're a great source if you're starting. because there are a whole bunch of expert witness consulting companies, and all they do is go to the big litigation law firms and pitch. And so they have a depository of expert witnesses. They get a cut of your hourly rate as well, but they'll sell for you. You know, and initially, when you're just starting, something's better than nothing. And I think the first year that I decided to be an expert witness, I had 8 cases, and they came quick, or one after another. And then I said, oh my God, what am I going to do? I got 8 cases, I got depositions, and I got crazy scheduling conflicts. So I kind of bit off too much. It was certainly overwhelming. And this was pre-COVID and everything was in person. You know, that's the other thing I want to talk about real quick. Expert witness work used to be an in-person endeavor. You would go to the deposition or they would come to you, but there was definitely traveling involved. And it's still like this in a lot of states. It depends on what state you're in, but there was no Zoom trial. There was no Zoom hearing. There was no Zoom nothing. And that in and of itself creates a serious amount of conflicts for people that run their own businesses. So know that we're moving more towards pre-COVID than post-COVID, meaning expectations for you to be in person for depositions are probably pretty high today. There are several states that do not allow testimony remotely, Texas being one of them. Right. And I'm not going to say every judge, but in my experience, if you're an expert witness, the judge wants you in court if you're going to be testifying. With that being said, when you get to be really well known and you have a substantial book of business, you can dictate your own terms. I have it in my contract that I will not travel for depositions or testimony. I am only available by Zoom. And if that doesn't work for my client, I'm sorry, but I'm at the point in my career and in my life where my time is precious and I've got to be careful with how much I take on because I've got 3 kids and all of my extracurricular duties as a parent, plus running my own business. Last thing I want to do is be stuck on the road for what could be 2 weeks, right? I mean, that's the thing. Trials don't care about your scheduling. If you get to court and the judge isn't ready for you, you're going to sit. You might be asked to stay because they may need you to rebut, right? So you lose control over your schedule. I mean, it's a big deal. Anyway, if you have amazing speaking skills, right? If you can explain things, if you're a teacher, if you've got those kind of skill sets and you're confident in how you communicate, I think that this would be something that you could do and do very well, right? No matter how aggressive opposing counsel gets, you can rest on the fact that you know your stuff. So if you know your stuff and you're a good speaker and you're organized and you can use PowerPoints and presentations and you like the courtroom, do it. I mean, for me, it was life-changing.
Love it. And let's talk about maybe the big mistakes or the number one thing to keep in mind if you do become an expert witness.
Great question. Gosh, this is such a slippery slope. So you're not an advocate, right? What does that mean? You don't take the sides. If this was a playground, you don't go to your client who's your buddy and, protect them from the bully. That's not your job. Your job is not to advocate for them. Your job is simply to tell the truth, right? You don't take sides. You don't put yourself in a position where you lose credibility. Look, I can't even tell. I mean, it happens countlessly, right? You have your reputation, your opinion. That's it. When you go in for a deposition and the opposing counsel asks you a question and the question is going to really upset your client because unfortunately the truth is not going to help them, that right there is your moment of clarity. I mean, that is your career on the line right then and there. It's it. There's nothing else that matters. So if you do the wrong thing and protect your client, you have blown your credibility. You will never, ever practice as an expert witness again. I think that's really the only dark side. And I think it's really difficult for people because a lot of times we get phone calls from our friends. I mean, like in my position, there isn't a person that owns an airplane that I don't know and know them well. Celebrity, non-celebrity, doesn't matter. I get calls from celebrities every day. I had a call from a very famous one this morning before we started this, and he's a friend. And if he had problems, right, now I got a celebrity client who's become a friend. I'm not taking that job. I refer that type of a situation, right? Don't do business with friends. Don't do expert witness work for friends. Don't advocate, right? Don't take sides. It's not your job. Got to remember what your job is. As long as you stick to what your job is and what your agreement said, your engagement letter, you got nothing to worry about. They might be upset. Yeah, maybe it forced them to settle. Maybe they had no case. That's not your job either. You're not a lawyer, right? Don't lawyer the case. Let the lawyers lawyer the case. But at the same time, I think the very most important thing you got to do is protect yourself, because I'm going to tell you this. They're not your lawyers. Your client's attorneys are there to protect the client, not you. When you go in for a deposition, you're on your own. Yeah, the lawyers are going to be there. They're not going to do anything to save your butt. They're not going to do anything to step in and save you. It will not happen. They're not your attorney, right? Same thing when you're in the courtroom. When you're on cross, they may object, but they can't save you. What they can do is their job, right? And that's why I say, some lawyers are really good at using experts and some aren't. And the ones that are really good at using experts through their questioning of you on the stand, trust me, the jurors are going to get it. The trier of fact is going to get it. Opposing counsel is going to be backed into a corner. I've had 2 trials where I went in and I was called to the stand and opposing counsel asked me what the weather was because they did not want me to speak about anything regarding damages, because anything I said was going to be carried with substantial weight to the jury. That was it. I got paid a massive sum of money for literally 30 seconds worth of work. It was a 3-year case, report after report after report. Literally, I was on the stand for 30 seconds. So it's up to you. Protect yourself. Don't protect yourself. Lose your credibility, gain credibility, right? It's your career. You got to do what you think is right. I mean, I can only share with you what's worked for me. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, stay objective, right? You're not advocating for anybody.
Right.
Stay calm under pressure. You're not being aggressive with the attorneys. And maybe talking about maybe number one mistakes, just in general, is there anything else we should keep in mind with pricing or how we structure our deals?
I know that a lot of appraisers are reluctant to talk about what they charge. I mean, I think that that's very old school, very consulting, 101 from people that were in the corporate environment from 30 or 40 years ago. They're like, the pricing was like some secret sauce. It's not. I think, you got to charge what's appropriate. So if we're talking about expert witness work, one of the things Seek is going to do is going to help you to establish your hourly rate. Obviously, there's a sweet spot. You go in too low, you're going to know, because all of a sudden you're going to get a tremendous amount of business, right? What's a low number in my industry? So this is something you got to take in mind. I can't give you any sort of help in anybody else's industry. I can give you some guidance, like the numbers I'm going to give you are solely based on what I do in aviation. An aviation expert witness on the low end, $275, $350 an hour. At the high end, $650, $750, $800 an hour. There's myself and 1 or 2 others that are at that threshold. The work we do is a little bit different than, your typical litigation. And I think that that's important to realize as well. Discounting. It's something that everybody feels that they should do. I think you need to look at what you charge for your appraisal work relative to what the work of scope is. And I don't think you need to discount, because I think a lot of people actually probably aren't leaving money on the table. I think a lot of people in my industry anyway charge too much. I think that that's maybe the danger. They think that there's not enough business to go around. So when they get the deal, they got to kind of go for the jugular. I don't think that that's the way to go. I think the way to go is to be very transparent and to publish your pricing on your website. That's what we do. It works really well, right? There's never a question, oh, you know, you gave me a discount. Everybody wants a discount. Everybody's your best friend when they have to order an appraisal, and they're going to beat you up for it. It helps when you say pricing's on my website. Here's the link. You can order it. It's kind of fixed, right? It's amazing what happens to the psyche of negotiating tactics when something's in writing, black and white on a website versus in an email. Email numbers are very negotiable. The website's fixed. I'm not going to call my webmaster and have them build some sort of discount in. I'm sorry, this is what I charge. And you're entitled to it. That's what's most important, right? If you charge $5,000 for a report and everybody in your industry is basically charging the same, right? I mean, that's kind of a threshold at that point. I mean, I think the only time we really start to see heavy discounts is with volume, at least in my industry. I mean, if I'm being asked to appraise 300 aircraft, I probably am not going to charge my one-off aircraft price because it would be insulting to my clients. I think that that's just business, 101. It's just being a smart entrepreneur. The goal here is to, at least in the beginning, is to make yourself appealing. So if that is through pricing, unfortunately, that's what you have to do. If you're young and you're just starting out, you probably are going to be charging a lot less. If you do get an expert witness job, yeah, you're probably going to be at the lower end of the threshold. But over time, it'll go up. And I think it happens naturally. Don't stress about when's the right time to raise your pricing. I think the easy thing to do, beginning of every year, come Thanksgiving, Christmas, do your budget. Know what your ad spend is going to be, what your pay-per-click spend is going to be, and then build that stuff back into your pricing. So, if everybody's charging you an additional 10%, then you should charge probably an additional 10% for your services, right? And I think if you do that every year, it's going to make it a lot easier to justify it to your client base, right? I think it's the knee-jerk reactions. That's when people question things. But pricing is definitely personal, which is why most of the time you don't see people address that in public. They feel that it's like asking you what you earn. All I will say is that when you get off of this seminar, if you go to into Google or ChatGPT and ask for competitor websites in your industry, you should be perusing them to see what they are publishing for their pricing, and you should maintain, that threshold. That would be my advice.
That's great. And any final thoughts? Anything we should keep in mind?
Yeah, don't forget, complete your quiz, everybody, because we want to give you CE. So that credit will come once we finish the seminar. We're going to send out that quiz to everybody, and then you can send it back and we'll grade it. We'll get you your CE certificate. And we're also going to jump into a Q&A right after this webinar as well. But I think in closing, if I had to summarize everything in like one line, you know what it would be? You're not selling reports, you're selling yourself. So build credibility, specialize, make yourself impossible to ignore.
Love it. All right. And then we will hop right into the Q&A.